The day the HOA sent fake officers to seize my bus, they thought they were about to scare an ordinary homeowner. They were very wrong. I still remember the exact moment the black SUV rolled slowly into my quiet street. It was just after sunrise, the kind of calm morning where nothing unusual ever happens. But that day felt different. Two men stepped out, both wearing dark uniforms and serious expressions. At first glance, they looked official, the kind of people neighbors don't question. One of them walked straight toward my bus with a clipboard, already acting like he owned the situation. That's when my instincts kicked in. Years of federal task force work had trained me to notice the small details most people miss. The badge shape looked slightly off. The posture was wrong. And the confidence they were projecting felt rehearsed, not real. I stepped outside slowly, keeping my expression calm. My neighbors had already started peeking through their windows, probably assuming I was in serious trouble. That's exactly what the HOA was counting on. "Sir, this vehicle is being seized under community authority," the taller one announced, tapping his pen against the clipboard like he'd done it 100 times before. I almost smiled. Almost. Because in that single sentence, he had already made 3 critical mistakes. But instead of calling them out, I played along. Sometimes the fastest way to expose a lie is to let it breathe. "Really?" I said calmly. "That's interesting." The shorter officer shifted his weight, just slightly. "Nervous?" "Good." They were already feeling the pressure, even if they didn't know why. What they didn't realize was simple. This wasn't my first encounter with people pretending to have authority. And today, they had chosen the absolute worst bus owner in the neighborhood to try their little stunt on. Because in just a few minutes, everything they thought they controlled was about to collapse in the most embarrassing way possible. And the HOA had no idea the federal storm they had just walked into. The street stayed quiet, but the tension in the air kept building with every second that passed. I could feel their impatience growing, and that was exactly what I wanted. When people rush, they make sloppy decisions, and sloppy decisions leave very clear evidence. I glanced once more at their vehicle, quietly confirming my suspicions. The decals were cheap, the radio antenna was fake, and the license plate told me everything I needed to know. They had walked into the wrong neighborhood, and very soon they were going to realize exactly why. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. The taller fake officer cleared his throat and took a half step closer to my bus, clearly trying to regain control of the moment. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back while we proceed," he said, forcing authority into his voice. Inside, I was already 3 moves ahead. "Proceed with what, exactly?" I asked calmly. That simple question did exactly what I expected. The shorter one glanced sideways at his partner for a split second too long. Real officers don't look at each other for permission. They already know their script. "Strike 1. The tall one recovered quickly. "Community enforcement order," he said, tapping the clipboard again. "HOA directive." There it was, the word they were leaning on like a crutch. HOA. I slowly folded my arms, not in defiance, but in observation. The neighbors were definitely watching now. Curtains had shifted. One garage door across the street was halfway open. The HOA loved public pressure. They thrived on embarrassment tactics. Unfortunately for them, public scenes work both ways. "Mind if I see the order?" I asked. Another pause. "Too long." "Strike 2. The shorter fake officer flipped through the clipboard pages with exaggerated confidence, but I could see his fingers weren't steady anymore. Paper rustled. He handed over a document that looked official at first glance: bold header, stamped seal, plenty of legal-sounding language. But the moment I took it, the problems jumped out like flashing warning lights. Wrong formatting. Incorrect municipal code reference. And the biggest giveaway of all, the signature block. I had seen hundreds of legitimate enforcement documents during my federal work. This one? Amateur hour. I looked up slowly, keeping my face neutral. Interesting paperwork. The tall one gave a tight smile. Everything appears to be in order, sir. That was the moment I knew they were fully committed to the lie. No backing out now. No graceful exit. Good. Because the deeper they dug, the harder the fall was going to be. I handed the paper back casually. So let me understand, I said evenly. You're here to seize my bus based on this? Yes, sir, he said quickly. Too quickly. Strike 3. Behind them, I noticed something else that made the situation even more serious. Down the street, another vehicle had slowly turned the corner and stopped. Unmarked. Watching. Now this was getting interesting. Either the HOA had gone much further than usual, or someone else had decided to join the show. And either way, these fake officers were about to find themselves in a situation they absolutely were not prepared for. I slipped my phone quietly into my palm. It was time to change the temperature of this entire encounter. I didn't make any sudden moves. In situations like this, calm wins every time. The fake officers were watching me closely now, probably expecting panic, maybe even compliance. Instead, I simply glanced down at my phone as if I were checking a message. In reality, I was already recording. Documentation first. Always. The taller one shifted again, impatience creeping through the cracks of his performance. Sir, we need you to step away from the vehicle. We don't want to escalate this. I almost admired the choice of words. Escalate. People who actually have authority don't usually warn you about escalation, they control it. These guys were fishing for cooperation, hoping I'd make their job easy. Not today. I looked up calmly. Before you touch anything, I said, my tone still even, I'm going to need both of your names and badge numbers. That landed exactly how I expected. The shorter one froze for half a second. Tiny, but noticeable. The tall one answered quickly, a little too quickly. Officer Daniels. Badge 4172. He said it smoothly, but his eyes gave him away. He was watching my reaction too carefully. Interesting. I nodded slowly, then looked at the second man. And you? A beat of silence. Officer Ramirez, he said finally. Badge 5521. Delayed response. Likely improvised. Strike 4. I tapped something on my phone, pretending to type. In reality, I was marking timestamps and capturing clear audio. If this went where I thought it might, clean records would matter. Behind them, the unmarked vehicle down the street hadn't moved. That was starting to bother me, not in a worried way, but in a curious one. Whoever was inside was definitely observing the situation. The tall fake officer tried again. Sir, last warning. Step away from the bus. There it was, the push. Pressure usually means they're on a clock. I took one slow step back, but not in surrender. In positioning. Before we go any further, I said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time, which department are you with? Another micro pause. Tiny. But fatal. County enforcement, he replied. Wrong answer. I knew every legitimate enforcement body that operated in this region. County enforcement did not and could not conduct HOA vehicle seizures on private residential streets. Now I was completely certain. These weren't just sloppy. They were completely out of their depth. I let a few seconds of silence hang in the air. Long enough for discomfort to start creeping in. Long enough for the neighbor's curiosity to turn into full attention. Then I did something that made both men visibly tense. I smiled. Not friendly. Not nervous. The kind of calm smile that makes people suddenly realize they may have misjudged the situation very badly. Because at that exact moment, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to start pulling the thread that would unravel their entire operation. The moment I smiled, everything shifted. You could see it in their faces, that tiny flicker of doubt people get when their script stops working. Up until now, they were expecting fear, maybe frustration. What they were not expecting was calm confidence. That's when the tall one made his next mistake. "Sir," he said more sharply, "this is your final notice." Final notice. Interesting choice of words for someone who had no real authority. I slowly slipped my phone back into my pocket, making sure the recording was still running. Then I took one measured step forward toward them. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just enough to change the balance of the conversation. "Before you touch my bus," I said evenly, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to fix this situation." Both men stiffened. People running a bluff hate unexpected options. The shorter one spoke this time. "Sir, we're authorized." I raised one finger slightly. He stopped mid-sentence. That alone told me everything about their training level or lack of it. Real officers don't freeze that easily when interrupted. Behind them, the unmarked vehicle down the street still hadn't moved, but I noticed something new. The driver's side silhouette had shifted slightly forward. Watching closely. Very closely. Good. I turned my attention back to the fake officers. "You have two choices," I said calmly. "You can walk back into that SUV right now and leave quietly, or this situation becomes federal in about 30 seconds. That landed hard. The tall one's jaw tightened. The shorter one's eyes flicked not at me but at their vehicle. Nervous check. They were feeling the ground move under their feet now. Still, the tall one tried to hold the line. "Sir, you're interfering with an official enforcement action." There it was again. Official. They kept leaning on that word like repetition would make it true. I exhaled slowly, then reached calmly into my jacket. Both men immediately tensed. Hands twitched. Weight shifted. Adrenaline spike obvious and immediate. But I moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my wallet. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just controlled. I flipped it open and held it at chest level where they could see clearly. For a full second, neither of them reacted. Then the color drained from the shorter one's face first. The tall one leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he focused on the credentials. And that's when everything finally began to crack. Because printed clearly inside that wallet was the one thing they absolutely did not expect to see today. Federal Task Force. The silence that followed was heavy. Thick. Dangerous. And down the street, the door of the unmarked vehicle quietly opened. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The air felt different now, heavier, sharper, like the moment before a storm breaks. The tall fake officer was still staring at my credentials, but the confidence he walked in with was completely gone. People can fake authority. They can fake uniforms. They can fake paperwork. But they can't fake that moment when reality hits them in the chest. The shorter one swallowed hard. I saw it clearly. Good. I slowly closed my wallet and slipped it back into my jacket, giving them time to process what they had just seen. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people talk. Behind them, the door of the unmarked vehicle down the street opened fully. A man stepped out. Plain clothes. Purposeful walk. And unlike the two in front of me, this one moved like someone who actually belonged in high-pressure situations. Now the tall fake officer tried to recover. "Sir, we were just following HOA instructions." There it was. The first crack in the story. I tilted my head slightly. So now it's HOA instructions. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The shorter one shifted backward half a step, almost without realizing it. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Whatever script they had rehearsed clearly didn't include this scenario. The plainclothes man from the unmarked vehicle was getting closer now, walking calmly but directly toward us. I didn't look at him yet. Didn't need to. I could already tell. This situation was about to flip completely. The tall fake officer cleared his throat again, voice noticeably tighter. "Look, sir, we don't want any problems." That almost made me laugh. You already have problems. Big ones. But I kept my face neutral. You should have thought about that before you showed up in fake uniforms. Both of them froze. Direct hit. The shorter one's eyes widened. We're not. I held up my hand again. He stopped. Strike pattern confirmed. At that exact moment, the plainclothes man finally reached us. He didn't rush. Didn't posture. He simply stepped into the space beside the fake officers and spoke in a calm, controlled voice. "Morning." Just one word. But the effect was immediate. The tall fake officer turned toward him and whatever he saw on the man's face made his shoulders drop half an inch. Recognition. Uh-oh. The plainclothes man finally looked at me briefly, then back at them. And then he said the sentence that officially ended their little operation. "Gentlemen. I'm going to need both of you to keep your hands where I can see them." The street went completely silent. Because now the roles had officially reversed. The moment he gave the command, the entire atmosphere snapped tight like a pulled wire. The two fake officers didn't move at first. Not because they were confident but because they were stunned. You could actually see the hesitation ripple through their bodies. The tall one recovered first, forcing a shaky chuckle. "Whoa, hold on. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." Classic. When the bluff collapses, the word misunderstanding suddenly appears. The plainclothes agent didn't smile. Didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated, slower this time. "Hands. Where I can see them." That's when the shorter one's composure finally cracked. His hands came up halfway, uncertain, like he wasn't sure how deep the trouble actually went. The tall one hesitated a second too long. Bad move. The agent shifted his stance, subtle, controlled but unmistakably professional. I'd seen that posture 1,000 times on real operations. Calm readiness. Zero theatrics. "Now," the agent added quietly. That did it. Both men raised their hands fully. Across the street, I noticed at least 3 neighbors now openly watching from their driveways. Phones were out. Curtains were wide open. The quiet HOA pressure tactic had completely backfired into a public spectacle. Exactly the opposite of what they wanted. The tall fake officer tried one more time. "Sir, we're contracted enforcement. You can call the HOA." The agent cut him off smoothly. "You can explain everything in a moment." His eyes flicked briefly toward me, just enough to acknowledge what I already knew. They'd been watching longer than these two realized. Interesting. Very interesting. The shorter fake officer was sweating now. Not lightly. Full stress response. His earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by the look of someone mentally replaying every bad decision that led him here. The tall one was still trying to hold together whatever was left of their story. "Look," he said carefully, "we were told this vehicle was in violation." I finally spoke again, calm and steady. "By who?" That question hung in the air like a spotlight. Neither of them answered immediately. Because now every word mattered. The agent stepped slightly closer to them. Not aggressive, just enough to tighten the space and remind them the situation had changed permanently. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you one more time." A pause. Heavy. Controlled. "Who sent you here today?" The shorter one broke first. His voice came out tight. The HOA board. And just like that, the door to a much bigger problem swung wide open. The moment the words left his mouth, the HOA board, the silence that followed was different. Heavier. More dangerous. Because now this wasn't just two amateurs in fake uniforms. Now there was motive, and possibly coordination. The plainclothes agent didn't react immediately. That alone told me he was processing fast. Good operators don't rush the moment the truth starts spilling out. The tall fake officer shot a quick glare at his partner. Too late. Once someone cracks, the story rarely holds together. The agent spoke calmly. Which member of the HOA board? The shorter one hesitated. The tall one jumped in quickly. We were hired through a compliance contractor. Everything is legitimate. Legitimate. They were still clinging to that word like it might save them. I finally stepped slightly to the side, giving the agent a clearer angle while keeping my eyes on both men. Funny thing about legitimate operations, I said evenly. They usually don't involve fake badges and incorrect municipal codes. Neither of them had a response to that. Across the street, more phones were definitely recording now. What started as quiet neighborhood pressure had turned into a full public meltdown. Exactly the kind of exposure the HOA absolutely hated. The agent extended his hand calmly. I'm going to need your identification. The tall one hesitated again. Strike after strike. Slowly, both men reached for their wallets. No sudden moves now. No fake authority posture. Just two very nervous individuals realizing their morning had gone completely off the rails. They handed over their IDs. The agent examined them carefully, his expression giving away nothing. But I caught the small shift in his jaw, the kind that means something just confirmed a suspicion. Then he asked the question that made the shorter one visibly tense. Do you gentlemen normally conduct vehicle seizures without local law enforcement present? Silence. Thick. The tall one tried carefully. We were instructed this was a private community matter. The agent looked up slowly. That instruction was wrong. Simple. Direct. Devastating. The shorter one exhaled shakily, and that's when I knew they were fully unraveling now. Whatever story they walked in with had completely collapsed. But the real problem for them wasn't just standing in front of them. It was what was coming next. Because HOA boards don't usually take risks like this unless someone pushed the situation too far. And I had a very strong feeling this little stunt was about to climb much higher up the chain than anyone on that board was prepared for. The agent handed the IDs back slowly. Here's what's going to happen, he said calmly. Both fake officers leaned forward slightly. Waiting. Worried. Because deep down, they already knew this was far from over. Both men on the sidewalk were holding their breath. You could see it in the tightness of their shoulders, the way their eyes stayed locked on the plainclothes agent like he was about to decide their entire future in the next sentence. He didn't rush. Professionals never do. Here's what's going to happen, the agent repeated calmly. You two are going to explain very carefully who authorized this operation, who provided those uniforms, and who instructed you to touch this vehicle. The tall fake officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. The shorter one looked like he might actually fold on the spot. I stayed quiet, arms loosely at my sides, letting the pressure do its work. Sometimes silence is louder than any accusation. Across the street, someone's phone camera zoomed in. The HOA loved to create scenes to intimidate homeowners. Today, the scene was working against them. Finally, the tall one tried again, voice noticeably weaker. Sir, we were just following a removal request submitted through the HOA compliance office. The agent tilted his head slightly. Name. Another pause. Mr. Halbrook, the tall one said. There it was. A name. And judging by the agent's very slight eyebrow movement, that name meant something. Interesting. The agent pulled out his phone and stepped a few feet away, speaking quietly into it. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. Possible impersonation, unauthorized enforcement attempt. HOA involvement. Yeah. This had officially moved beyond neighborhood drama. When he stepped back toward us, his tone had shifted, still calm, but now carrying the weight of someone who had just confirmed bad news. "Gentlemen," he said, "you're going to remain here while we sort this out." The shorter fake officer looked like his knees might give out. Are we being detained?" The agent met his eyes evenly. "For now, you're being strongly advised not to leave." That answer landed exactly the way it was meant to. Not dramatic. Not loud. But crystal clear. The tall one finally exhaled, long and slow, like the last bit of fight had drained out of him. Whatever confidence they walked in with that morning was completely gone now. And the street, once quiet and ordinary, had turned into the worst possible stage for their mistake. Because now, this wasn't just about a bus. This was about impersonation. Fraud. And a very nervous HOA board that probably had no idea how fast this situation was escalating. I glanced once at my bus, then back at the two men. Yeah. They had picked the wrong driveway. The street stayed frozen in that strange, heavy silence that only happens when everyone realizes something serious has just unfolded. The two fake officers stood exactly where the agent had positioned them. No more posturing. No more clipboard confidence. Just quiet, visible damage control running behind their eyes. Within minutes, we heard it. Distant at first. Then unmistakable. Real sirens. The shorter one closed his eyes briefly. The tall one just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Whatever story they had been telling themselves this morning was officially over. Two marked units rolled slowly into the street and stopped behind their SUV. This time, the uniforms stepping out were the real thing, calm, controlled, and already briefed by the plainclothes agent. One of the responding officers approached. "What do we have?" The agent answered evenly. "Possible impersonation tied to an HOA-directed vehicle seizure attempt." You could almost feel the temperature drop another 10 degrees. The responding officer looked directly at the two men. "Gentlemen, we're going to sort this out downtown." Neither of them argued. They couldn't. Because the moment real authority entered the scene, the entire illusion they had built collapsed completely. As they were calmly escorted toward the patrol units, the shorter one finally looked back at me. Not angry. Not defiant. Just stunned. Like he still couldn't believe how badly this had gone. I simply gave him a small, polite nod. Nothing more. Because this was never about making a scene. It was about letting the truth surface on its own. Across the street, neighbors slowly began retreating back inside, their morning entertainment clearly over. Phones lowered. Curtains closed. The HOA's favorite tactic, public pressure, had just boomeranged in the worst possible way. The plainclothes agent stepped beside me once things settled. "You handled that calmly," he said. I shrugged slightly. "They made it easy." He gave a faint smirk, then glanced once at my bus. "You might be hearing from that HOA board again." "Good," I replied evenly.
Because if we today providing anything, it was simple. When people try to weapons fake authority, they better be very sure who they targeting. They start slowly return to normal, but one thing was written. Word of what happened. Weird words separate fast through the neighborhood and the HOA. They had just learned an expensive lesson. Some owners don't bluff.